All righty. At this moment, we're going to talk to a man who certainly understands what is going on and perhaps the next likely steps for the United States to take. He was responsible for the CIA. Former CIA Director James Woolsey joins us. Good morning.
Morning. Good to be with you.
Well, we now hear that Pakistan says it's going to give us its support, let us go over its airspace, and perhaps use its ground for staging land attacks, as long as it's a multinational force. Does that give you comfort?
Not really. We may want to do that. But the first thing is to find out what governments are involved. I think there may be more involved here than the Taliban. One of the men who conducted one of the pilots who crashed one of these airplanes, American Flight 11, had been in this country since 1993, taking a 4-year course. This is a long-term operation by some institution and entity, I think, more complex than just the Taliban or bin Laden. And I think the government of Iraq may be involved. I think there may be other governments involved. And the most important thing is to find out who to retaliate against and how to do so effectively, not to do something quickly. So it may well be that at some point we want to use force against Afghanistan, but the first decision ought to be to figure out who to act against and how to do it effectively, not just to do something.
Jim, just hours after the terror strikes on the Twin Towers and the Pentagon, suddenly we were hearing reports that indeed intelligence sources had intercepted cell phone calls between bin Laden's supporters, and they were talking about mission accomplished and stuff like that. It seems like we are great at gathering intelligence, but not so good at analyzing the intelligence. Well, and I know that you ran the CIA for years, but there are a lot of people in this country who say, you know what, the CIA blew it on this one.
Well, I ran the CIA from 1993 to 1995, but people need to understand that the CIA doesn't spy inside this country. And they don't spy on Americans. And inside this country, there's law enforcement, and they look into the commission of crimes. A number of these people had been here for some substantial period of time.
Sure.
And also, I would suggest when you pick up lots of telephone conversations, and when Mr. bin Laden is sitting out there in the desert in Afghanistan, issuing fatwas, religious edicts to kill Americans, making videotapes, reciting poetry, having his subordinates talk on open telephone lines about their successes, somebody ought to start getting suspicious that we're supposed to focus, that he wants us to focus mainly on him in order to distract attention away from some other people who may have been involved too, such as some of the governments. It is not an exclusive contract to conduct terrorism. Bin Laden may well have been deeply involved in this and some of the terrorist groups that he's involved with, but there may have also been some governments, and such as Iraq or Iran or Syria. And we need to focus hard on that because those governments are going to be considerably more lucrative and important targets for us in terms of trying to change their regimes, let's say, than dropping some bombs on somebody in the desert sooner rather than later.
James, you're back ahead of the CIA. Just imagine you could redo your constitution on what the CIA can and can't do. Many have said that the CIA today has shackles on it, that Congress has said you can't do this, you can't do that, therefore they're not effective. Stop with the criticism. We're doing the best with the rules we have. So tell me, what rules does the CIA need to be as effective as it possibly can?
Well, one set of rules that needs to be changed badly is some that were adopted by the CIA itself in '95, I hasten to say, after I left. It was in response to this mess down in Guatemala involving Mr. Bamako, a rebel who was killed by the Guatemalan military. And out of that, the CIA decided to issue guidelines, which essentially make it difficult. They don't make it impossible, but they make it more difficult than it needs to be to recruit spies inside organizations if those spies may have some violence in their background. Well, you know, that's well and good to be moralistic, but the only people inside bin Laden's organization are people who want to be violent.
Absolutely.
It's like telling the FBI they can recruit people inside the mafia, but they can't recruit any crooks. It's crazy. So I think that's one set of guidelines that needs to be lifted and changed right away, and we recommended that last summer on a terrorism commission that I was on.
That seems mild. I thought you'd have a bigger list than that. I'm serious. I thought you were going to go through a laundry list of things that has to happen.
Well, the other thing that happened is that the CIA was given some substantial amount of money in 1998-99 to work on terrorist matters because Y2K was coming up. Y2K did come. The CIA, as well as the rest of American intelligence and some foreign friends, thwarted several important terrorist operations. And then the morning of January 1st, 2000, the budgeteers in the executive branch and the Congress sort of dusted off their hands and said, well, now that problem is solved, and let's take the budget back down to lower levels again. Sure. And so they lost some ground. I mean, it's a typical American failing to think once you solved a problem, it stays solved.
Well, let's go back to something I think that was very critical that you said, and that is that this may be much bigger than just that man. Sure. But he is the face that has been put on this by almost everyone. If we do go in and attack and hopefully kill that man, does that then take the resolve, the will, the anger out of the American public and perhaps thwart the government if it feels that they do need to go after governments such as Iraq?
Well, I think the most important thing is not to get immediate gratification for our anger. The most important thing is to be effective. And as your question suggests, the most effective strategy here may be a long-term one to undermine several of these regimes that have been active in the sponsorship of terrorism. That may or may not involve the use of Tomahawks and B-2s and the like. I think at some point it probably will. But, you know, right after Fort Sumter was fired on in 1861, there were a bunch of Confederates up here near a place called Bull Run. And all the lovely people in Washington went out to watch the Yankees vanquish them. It was going to be over very quickly. And a fellow named Stonewall Jackson kind of spoiled that for the Union. And it was a long and bloody war. I'm afraid that anybody who thinks that we're going to get this over with quickly and that by some bombing attack somewhere in Afghanistan or any place else, we're going to effectively deal with the problem is just quite wrong. What's important is to get this job done right, and I think that means very heavily focusing on some of the regimes that have been supporting terrorism.
Jim Woolsey, former CIA director, we thank you for joining us this morning from our nation's capital.
Good to be with you.